Not long after they started walking, Slasher saw a bolt of lightning. Like a bloody cut, red lightning streaked across the sky. He saw several more, followed by a crash of thunder. It was bad enough that it was freezing, but now it had to rain. He hated the rain. Hated it ever since he was a child and his father, a prince, would cast him out into the weather. Each time, his father would say he would not suffer a half-breed to live in his home, only to send his guards to fetch him a few days later. One time that stuck out in his mind was when he was 6. He had wandered the woods for days. If he had not been found by one of his father's elven slaves, he would have died. Every time from then on, the old blind elven woman who had saved him would take him into her home when his father kicked him out of the home. It would be just his luck that it would start raining now. Something warm and wet hit him in the face, blown by the wind, followed by several more of the same. Before he could swear, a torrent of rain began to fall. The servant of the blade was quickly soaked, despite his cloak, and rain trickled down his face. A droplet of rain touched his lips, and he tasted it. Boiling steel! It was blood! She had been right. Arethia, the old blind woman that had taken care of him, had been right. Arethia had raised him on tales of things that roamed the night, things that fed on the blood of the living, ate human flesh, and devoured the soul. But the stories he remembered most had been about something called Blood Night. Said to occur every 55 years, Blood Night was the night the sky wept blood, wept in pain from the torment caused by the senseless war between the mages and the necromancers. He had never really believed in the tales that Arethia had told him, only listening to them to appease an old woman. Slasher did not believe in anything that he could not see, hear, or cut. Even now, with blood trickling down his face and the taste in his mouth, he was having trouble believing. On either side of him, in the darkness, were dozens of purple eyes. Slasher did not know what the eyes belonged to, but they hissed and cursed at the light. The servant of the blade was glad he had spent the last of the species on the lantern. He found it somewhat comforting, despite the fact that the lantern now gave off a warped light. He knew that if the light were to fail, then whatever was watching him would rush him in a heartbeat. Considering how many eyes he saw, he doubted he had enough daggers. Up ahead, Meagle walked as if nothing was wrong, as if he did not notice the warm, red rain or the ice-cold wind that made Slasher feel as if he were naked. Slasher wondered if there was something about the wards on Meagle's clothes because they were still gray. What Slasher really wanted to know was why a man would walk outdoors at night without any weapons, at least none that were visible. Most people looking at Slasher would think him unarmed, but he had dozens of daggers hidden over his body. Maybe it was the same with Meagle, or maybe he was so secure in his faith that he did not have weapons. He had heard tales of the priests and servants of the blade that could kill just by whispering a prayer to the blade. Who knew how Slyne answered the prayers of her worshippers? But if that was the case, why use magic? The thoughts made his head hurt. There was something about Meagle that Slasher did not trust, but he could not put his finger on it. He could still feel a tingling in his blood, and had felt it ever since he'd met Meagle. The servant of the blade did not know what the tingling meant, but he had felt it before when he had been younger. But the weight of the bag at his belt and the promise of more species was enough to quell in worries. They passed through several ruins, many of them having been taken over by the forest. Broken buildings stood like silent sentinels to the past. The freezing wind howled through the ruins, and the rain poured all the harder. They walked over broken stone floors that were all that was left of buildings. Sometimes all that remained of a building was a wall still standing. To his surprise, Slasher saw several naked women dancing in the rain. Their hair and skin were soaked with blood. As they danced, they allowed the rain to pour into their upturned mouths. Any words they might have been saying were lost to the wind and rain. What in tempest was he seeing? He wondered if he was seeing some bizarre ritual being. Even though there were no wards on the building, it looked as if the rain had not touched it. Over the 2 wooden doors was a cross with a woman nailed to it. The more Slasher stared at her, the more he began to realize that she was still alive. He turned to Meagle, a look of horror on his face. "Females wait for months for the honor to reenact the last moments of Saint Bernice," said Miguel, his voice filled with pride. "How long will she be there?" asked Slasher, wishing at once that he had not asked the question. "Until she dies," said Meagle without emotion. What the fuck was wrong with these people, that they would do this to themselves? Meagle led Slasher up to 2 beautifully decorated wooden doors. He held open one of the doors for the Servant of the Blade, and Slasher walked in. As he walked in, Slasher felt as if he were being swallowed by a great maw. To his surprise, the room was lit by dozens of torches. The room was large, and the floor was covered with dried blood and other bodily fluids. "Worshippers have been known to whip themselves until they pass out from the pleasure," said Meagle, as if it were the sanest thing one could do. "She is the goddess of pain, the mistress of agony, the mother of all suffering. Do not turn away from her, but embrace her, my son," said a rough voice from behind him. "Be glad he didn't want to kill you, or you'd be dead now." The voice in his head was the priest of the blade, Father Marcus. He had been the man who had trained Slasher. Even though the priest was dead, he still yelled advice into the Servant of the Blade's head. The voice from behind him came from a man dressed in brown robes. He was shorter than the Servant of the Blade, and his robes hung on his gaunt form, but his voice suggested strength. His face was hidden in the shadows of his hood. "I am Father Randall, the voice of Slime. Forgive me if I startled you." The man's voice sounded as if he had swallowed broken glass. By the blade, how had this man walked so quietly? He should have heard him. After all, Father Randall was an ordinary priest, not a priest of the blade. "So, you are the one known as Slasher?" asked Father Randall. "I've heard you were good." "I am the best at what I do," said Slasher. "Ah, an attitude. I like that." He crossed his arms over his chest. "You are probably wondering why you were led all over the place." "Yes, I was," said Slasher. "That is to make certain you were who you said you were. That is why I had Meagle ask around about you. By the way, do you know how much the price for your capture is?" Father Randall asked, as if he were discussing the weather over tea. 30,000 gold species, said Slasher, as if he did not consider it enough. "Quite a lot for one man, wouldn't you say? What is also curious is why is there such an importance on you being taken alive?" asked Father Randall. "That is because the king wants to see me nailed to a tree," said Slasher matter-of-factly. "Ah," said the priest, as if he understood. "Who is it that you want killed?" asked Slasher. "The direct approach," said Father Randall. "I thought we could talk some, but if you want to talk business, we can." Pointing to the painting, Father Randall said, "At one time, her religion was accepted. People may not have liked it, but we weren't hated. But Bishop Damien changed all that." Father Randall began to walk in a circle. "Bishop Damien talked King Joshua into having her religion banned and me exiled. The king had me exiled, all right?" yelled the priest. "I was chased from the Raven's Roost as people threw rocks, stones, and rotting food at me." "So, do you want me to kill the king or the bishop?" asked Slasher. "Oh, no. I have something better in mind." He made a strange sound that took Slasher a moment to realize it was laughter. It sounded as if the man were choking on his own spit. "I want you to kill Prince Joncar. I want the king to suffer the way I have," said Father Randall. "I want the king to know the true meaning of power." "Do you want the prince to know who wants him dead?" asked Slasher.